When I heard that Dr. Teresa and her colleagues were seeking designation of the Bredor Lakes as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, I was delighted. And when I heard that that had been achieved and that we now had a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve here in the Bredor Lakes, I was thrilled. And when I was asked to speak here today, I was humbled. And I thought to myself, what can I bring to this party with all these wonderful entertainers, these distinguished guests, and ministers of the crown? So what can I bring to this? And I thought, I guess what I can bring is a little bit of an account of my 40-year love affair with these lakes. And I thought, well, what is it that I love so much about the lakes? And 4 words came to mind: boats, eagles, music, and wisdom. Let me start with the boats. I was telling my wife as we came across the bridge a few minutes ago of one of the first experiences I had sailing on the lakes. I had bought a little schooner in Lunenburg. I knew nothing about sailing. I had never sailed in my life. I just knew I passionately wanted to do it. And I wanted to do it in a Nova Scotian built traditional boat. So I bought this little schooner in Lunenburg, and I took off from my home in Almadam, and I came out over here through the St. Peter's Inlet, all by myself on this 33-foot schooner. And I looked out at the lake and it all looked good, and I took off. And the wind came up out of West Bay, and the first thing I knew, I had a howling gale. And I knew that what you did with the schooner was first you lowered the mainsail, so I did that. And then I knew that the second thing you did was to lower the jib, and I did that. And so now I'm left with only the little foresail to jog across. And as I recall it, I think I may have turned the engine on, so just ticking over. And the next hour or so, a couple of hours I guess, were among the longest hours of my life. I was absolutely petrified. I remember seeing the seas coming down out of West Bay about 6 feet high, and they looked like hammered pewter, and the wind whistling through the rigging. And I thought, if I get to the other side, if I ever reach Iona, I'll sell this boat. And I got to Iona, and I tucked in behind that big steel wharf down there. And in behind me came a big ketch from the United States that I'd seen jogging up across the lake. They were coming from East Bay, I from St. Peter's. And we sort of tied up and got together, and he said, "How are you?" And you made a nice passage. And I said, "Well, I was scared stiff." And he said, "Really?" He said, "You looked like you were doing just fine. You were jogging along very nicely there, and you know, I think your boat's good. You're good. What's the problem?" And I suddenly thought, I've actually done this. I've actually done this all by myself. And that was an introduction to the second set of vessels that are important to me on the lakes, and that was the realization that this is an international destination for cruisers. An international destination, and all the great cruisers of our time, the great cruising sailors, almost all of them have passed through these lakes and enjoyed them, often having crossed oceans to get here. So I began to feel that I was privileged enough that I didn't have to come here from Europe, sail here from Europe in order to enjoy the lakes. I just had to sail here from Almadam. Over the years thereafter, among the other great experiences with vessels here, I wrote a novel in Benvrea, down around the corner here, in the same little cove in which Alexander Graham Bell had his floating houseboat where he used to work. And there were a whole bunch of encounters with other great sailing vessels and great sailors over the years that made me feel that maybe I could do this. And you know, in 2004, my wife and I took our little boat from Cape Breton to the Bahamas and back. And we discovered in the course of all of this, I did learn something, and we discovered in the course of all of this that there are, in my estimation, 3 great cruising areas on the Bredor Lake, or in the east coast of North America. One is the Bahamas, one is Chesapeake Bay, and this is the third one, and it's the best. My very favorite story about the boats on the lakes comes from Leonard Pertus, the old Acadian skipper in my village in Discouse, who showed me how to sail a schooner. And he told me one day when he was running a trading schooner, he was coming down into Barra Strait from this direction, and he said the wind, there was a gale blowing behind him, and the railway bridge had to open to let him through, and he looked down and the bridge wasn't opening. And he said, I said, "What did you do?" He said, "What can you do?" He said, "There's no reverse into those boats." And then with the wind behind me, he said, I knew if I threw the anchor over, it wasn't going to catch. It was too deep. He said, so here was the bridge was closed, and we were coming at 16 knots or something with the tide underneath us. And I said, what did you do? And he said, I went below and got my wallet. Eagles. Eagles, for me, stand for all that wildlife that we've been talking about today and all the celebration of the fish beneath the sea, as Albert Marshall mentioned, and the birds the birds in the air and all the mammals that are out there, the otters, the seals, and so on. And my favorite memory about that one is being in the boom, a little narrow body of water heading up into Orangedale, just over here, anchored there. I should say that for 17 years I sailed a boat without an engine, so we often wound up in places where you wouldn't have actually expected to be. And we wound up unable to sail through the boom, so we pulled over to the side. We had oars. We rowed it over to the side, dropped the anchor, and we could hear all the way along all the way along the waterway. You could hear the eagles in the trees. The whole boom was just full of eagle nests, and the eagles were calling and crying. This was at a time, this is the national bird of the United States, and at the time it was almost extinct in the United States, but it was plentiful here. And my son figured out how to make a sound like an eagle. At about 10 years old, I guess, at that point. And so as the eagles would sort of wrap it up for the night and calm down a little bit, he'd suddenly start up the sound again, and then the whole community of eagles would sound up again, and so forth. It was as though he was the conductor, just conducting this wonderful orchestra of eagles. One of these moments that you never expect and you'll never forget. Music. I had the privilege of being the executive director of Centre Brador in Badek for some years when we established the Centre Brador Festival of the Arts in the summertime. And I was able to hear some of the world's greatest musicians, people like Odetta and Donovan and so on, playing over there. But the great thrill about that was putting our own Cape Breton acts on the stage at the same time and having it be perfectly obvious that the best of Cape Breton was as good as the best in the world. You've seen that today. You've seen that today. So I think back on the pleasure of coming to Highland Village Days on this stage and this hill. I never thought I'd be speaking here. I've come here often to listen. I remember sailing in October one time in the lakes. The lakes are at their best next month when the colors change and the leaves are at the most brilliant. Nobody's sailing, but I got to go sailing, and that was a year in which the Atlantic Symphony Orchestra was playing in Badek. And the pleasure of being able to sail into Nyanza to the Herring Choker Deli and get some fresh organic food and sail back to Badek, tie your boat up, and walk up the hill to the high school and hear a symphony orchestra. I thought to myself, I don't know what the rich people do, but it cannot possibly be any better than this. I also remember people like Will Pringle from Pringle's Harbor just across the other side of the lake here. Will was the only person I think I've ever known who was an absolute virtuoso of Celtic music on the harmonica. And he was just fabulous, and the only one I think who ever did that. And of course now Celtic Colours is a worthy successor to all of that. The only festival I know of that goes on in dozens of communities all around in a place as big as Cape Breton Island, and every one of those concerts is a joy. And finally, on the question of wisdom, my fourth word, there I come to our friends the Mi'kmaq, and some really special experiences on the lakes here with the native people. I remember, for example, one evening winding up in Mullaghawait and rowing ashore and finding myself with a couple of Indian mothers and their small children. And a young man named Bij, his name was Joe Denny, came we had a campfire, and I thought to myself, how often do the rest of us who are not natives get to sit around a campfire with natives and talk about things that matter? Joe Denny came along, and he had just finished building a cross, following a dream of his father's, a cross at the cemetery in Mullaghawait. And that day, for the first time, they had held a mass at that cross. And in the middle of it, he said, would you like to see it? And I said, yes. And we all got up and we went in the middle of the night to this cross on a beautiful moonlit night, looking out across that lake with this cross outlined before us. It was one of those really magic moments. St. Anne's Mission is another one of these magic moments I've gotten to go to a couple of times. But the one I really wanted to end with here was a It was, a cruise where we wound up in Eskasoni. And as we walked through Eskasoni, we were obviously a bit of a curiosity, people who had arrived on a sailboat. And we fetched up a meeting Albert and Redina Marshall, and then we got invited to dinner at the home of Sakesh Henderson and Marie Battist. And in the course of that conversation, we began talking about native spirituality. And Marie said something so memorable that I wrote it down and I eventually published it, and I'd like to share it with you today. Marie said, "As we woke in the world, naked and alone, we asked our Creator how we should live. And our Creator gave us the knowledge and the skills to survive, to hunt, to fish, to cure animal skins for clothing. He gave us knowledge of medicines to cure us when we were ill, medicines which come from the earth, because we come from the earth and are part of the earth. He gave us information about the constellations and the stars, our guideposts in the darkest nights, to find our way. And our Creator gave us knowledge of the Milky Way, which is the path to the land of souls. And He taught us how to pray, to sleep, to dream, and what to be aware of during our dreams, where we would receive essential knowledge from the other world. The two worlds would be separated by a cloud that would open and fall at different intervals, and the strong and the believing could pass through unscathed, but the weak and unbelieving would be crushed. To me," said Marie, "this describes the people whose spirit has been crushed by drugs, alcohol, boarding school, the lack of language, and the others whose spirit has not been broken, who can laugh through poverty and trouble. And our Creator gave us the Mi'kmaq language to pass on all of this knowledge, which is why it is so important that the languages should survive. Cannot tell you how thrilled I am to have heard so much of the Mi'kmaq language today, and to see it honored as it has been during this celebration. So this has been a place for the Mi'kmaq and for the rest of us of magic since time immemorial, and now I'm thrilled to see that it has achieved world recognition. But you know, what's important today here is not what UNESCO has done. It's what the people of the lakes have done. It's what the community around this lakes has done to get this designation and cause this celebration. And it's been done really for all of us who love this magical place. And what I really want to end by saying to all of those people who worked so hard for this is thank you for all of us who love this place. Thank you.